Yeah. Good evening, Samitra. Thanks for joining.
Suresh, you can hear me?
Yeah, I can hear
You
you.
can hear me?
Yeah, I can
Yeah.
hear you and I see you as well. You can share your
Right. So
screen.
I'll just
Yeah.
try. Yeah, let me try that. Uh, Screen share is present now. Enter screen. Share. Share. See. Can you see it now?
Yes, it's loading. Yes, we can see it.
Okay. And I want to make it full screen.
Mhm.
It's okay, right?
Yes. Yeah.
So,
People are.
Suresh,
Uh,
you let me know when do you want to start? Yeah.
yes, well, I think your talk will start at 6 o'clock. We'll just for a couple of minutes and then introducing you, and then you can start. We'll just
Okay.
wait because people are joining now. Yeah.
Sure. Sure. Sure.
Good evening. The talk will start at 6 o'clock, but let me just start off. I hear an echo, so maybe if you have mic on, please mute it now. My name is Ananta Suresh. Now I'm speaking on behalf of Institute of Smart Structures and Systems, ISSS. This institute, as you saw in the slides, if you came a little bit before, uh, you saw the slides of what ISSS is about. It was started in 1999, much before smartphones became a part of our lives, daily lives. But IEEE stands for a lot of smart technologies, started with smart materials and systems, and then later microsystems, and then photonics, and now IoT, Internet of Things, and wherever sensors, actuators, and integration, all these are involved, IEEE has been part of it. We started this webinar series to engage with the members of this society as well as the general public. And in these difficult times, a distraction for us. That's what I said last time we had the first lecture. It's a distraction because distraction for research is always research. But hopefully, when there are interesting topics, this distraction actually becomes an attraction for you to come to IEEE webinars. Uh, I'm very thankful to Professor Samitra Das for agreeing to give this lecture in the evening on a topic that is in the air now, literally. So he's going to tell us everything that you ever wanted to know about novel coronavirus, but probably were afraid to ask. So I think this has been our mind. So I think he's going to tell us about that. Now, before he begins his lecture, I request one of our organizers, Professor Sunil Malagi, to introduce Professor Mitra Das. Sunil, over to you. And thank you all for coming. I see people from many parts of India, from Madurai to Kurukshetra and Kolkata and everywhere, Pune, and I see one person from Netherlands also. It's becoming international. Thank you all for coming. Enjoy the
Yeah,
talk.
yeah,
Sunil?
yes, sir. Yeah, thank you very much, sir. Good evening, everyone. So I would like to introduce Professor Soumitra Das. Professor Soumitra Das obtained his PhD degree from University of Calicut in '92, working at the Indian Institute of Chemical Biology. He has studied host pathogen interaction in Leishmania donovani, which causes the dreaded tropical diseases Kala Azar. As a postdoctoral fellow, he worked on host virus interactions at the University of California, Los Angeles. Later, he served the same department as an assistant research virologist. During this period, he discovered a small RNA molecule from Saccharomyces cerevisiae and showed its selective antiviral activity against polio and hepatitis C virus. He joined Indian Institute of Science in the October 1908, and his group has been studying the molecular basis of translation control of viral and cellular mRNAs. Much of his work has focused on internal initiation of translation of hepatitis C virus and Coxsackie B3 RNA, and lately extended to cellular RNA using P53 as model system. Professor Das is coordinating the Center of Excellence for Research on Hepatitis C virus, an interdisciplinary center of the Department of Biotechnology, Government of India, involving 8 other laboratories. He has been recognized with the National Bioscience Award for Career Development 2005 from Department of Biotechnology, NASI Reliance Platinum Jubilee Award for Innovation in Application-Oriented Research in Biological Sciences in the year 2010. And he has also achieved Ranbaxy Research Award in the field of medical sciences in the year 2012, Sir J.C. Bose National Fellowship from Department of Science and Technology in the year 2014. He is currently the Director of National Institute of Biomedical Genomics, Kalyani, West Bengal. So I welcome Professor Soumitra Das for this IEEE public lecture series. So I hand it over to you, sir. Thank you for being here. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. Thanks for the introduction, kind introduction. Thanks to Suresh and all the other organizers and members of this IEEE. It's a real pleasure for me to discuss about some biology problem with you. But, you know, a couple of years back, I have given an institute colloquium where I had to present the biology work in front of my engineering friends. So that was a real challenge. And but you know, we have been working with Suresh for a long time now on the mechanobiology. So I have also tried to understand this interdisciplinary science and the actually the excitement of the interdisciplinary science. So I also enjoy presenting to interdisciplinary audience. So I think you know, I'll go a little slow, but I hope that you will be able to follow a little bit of biology. I tried to make it a little popular, as is already mentioned, that at this moment I'm in an institute in Kolkata. It's little away from Kolkata. It's called Kalyani, where this institute is called National Institute of Biomedical Genomics. And we have in the neighborhood the ISAR Kolkata. You're probably all familiar about the ISAR Kolkata. But I am still a professor in the Department of Microbiology, Cell Biology, Indian Institute of Science. I'm on deputation here, and my lab is continuing there in the Indian Institute of Science. Now, Suresh asked me to introduce about this SARS coronavirus 2, which we call COVID-19. And, I just was actually perplexed because now I found that the people, one thing has Corona done, that they have made overnight so many virologists. And everybody is so much knowledgeable about the virus. I was actually a little worried that what I'm going to say little new to you, because most of it is already in the media, or you have read from the WhatsApp University. So very little is actually left for us to discuss. But anyway, we'll just catch up and then we'll recapitulate some of the things. Now, I will start with very beginning that, this is coronavirus is an RNA virus. Over the years, we have found this RNA virus has given us most of the trouble. I mean, if you call it like, Suresh says that our lab works on hepatitis C virus. There is dengue virus. You heard about chikungunya. You heard about now the coronavirus. All of these are RNA viruses. And so essentially, they adopt different strategies and exploit the cellular factors in a way that they are much more successful in causing damage and pathogenesis in the host. And that's how we are so much struggling. And not only that, they keep on changing their strategies. And that's essentially I'm going to highlight using coronavirus, the recent outbreak, as another strategy. So just to start with, if you really remember that in our school days, we have learned that usually from DNA, RNA is made, and from RNA, protein is made. So we call it transcription from DNA to RNA, and RNA to protein is translation. But it's actually from the virus, RNA virus, we learned, no, actually it's possible to make DNA out of RNA. So it's possible to use another enzyme called reverse transcriptase, and the process is called reverse transcription, which can make DNA from RNA. So it's essentially going away from actually our long time knowledge of this, the paradigm. So it's actually, not only that, we also learned that you don't need a DNA, you can actually make RNA out of RNA. So there is a polymerase called RNA-dependent RNA polymerase, which can make RNA out of RNA. So these are the things actually we have learned. So not only that we had the pain from the RNA viruses, actually when we studied the biology of the RNA viruses, we learned quite a bit of biology from these viruses. So this is just to start with. But why do you think this RNA virus is so difficult to handle? Now, the major problem that we figured over these years, long time people have been doing research with the RNA viruses, is essentially its high mutation rate. What do you mean by high mutation rate? That means there is misincorporation of the nucleotides when they copy their genome. So, and that happens because of lack of proofreading. Now, you can actually consider the RNA viruses are very, very poor student. When they copy, they cannot even copy correctly. Not only that, that is one reason. But there could be another reason that even if they find out that there is a mistake, they probably don't have the eraser to erase it and incorporate the right one into the right place. So the absence of an exonuclease activity in the enzyme, that RNA-dependent RNA polymerase that is actually meant for copying from RNA to RNA, is actually the reason to have a misincorporation, which we call mutation. So there is a high frequency of mutation, and that ends up with quasi-species. So you know about species, but when you have a little variation within species, we call it as a quasi-species. But this error rate is at the limit of the mutation tolerability. It cannot go endlessly. There is certain threshold. The principle, so what we do is essentially, sometimes we use some analog or some drugs which are actually acting as an analog to somehow cross this threshold so that the virus cannot evolve. That means if you have too many mutations, that virus cannot survive. And if the virus cannot survive, it cannot propagate. And that's how we can end the chain. And that's how we started using ribavirin for a long time for RNA viruses. And now remdesivir is being used for the coronaviruses as well. So the idea is to cross the threshold. Now we talked about the mutation rate, but how is the mutation rate and how much is the difference? Now, if you really look at it, the mutation rate, if you start with the viroid, is actually the highest. You can see it, and then the RNA viruses, which is like an Ebola. Then if you just go down to, let's say, you go to mycophage, then you go down to some parasites, or even for or mites, you can see as and when the genome size increases, the mutation rate is actually decreases. So mutation rate is very high. So somehow the lesser the size of the genome, there are chances of accommodating mutations in the more. Actually, we should think other way around, that if you have a huge genome, there are more scope of having more mutations. But that's not the case. Actually, you can see in the next slide, if you see here within the RNA virus also, there are certain viruses which frequently mutates. And that's actually highest for the single-stranded RNA viruses. You can see, or even negative-stranded RNA viruses, something like H5N1, H1N1. All of you know about this flu, swine flu, or you know about the avian flu. They keep on coming, and actually every time they are different. Every time there is a mutations in them, right? You know, we talked about hepatitis C, which is somewhere here. It's actually flaviviruses. Then you have the chikungunya here, or even dengue viruses here. You can see, considering the others like a human papilloma virus, the mutation rate is much, much higher when you go for a positive strand or a negative strand RNA viruses. And what if you go back to Charles Darwin, what he said, that the variability is not actually caused by a man. He only unintentionally exposed organic being to new conditions of life. And then nature acts on the organization and causes it to vary. So part of this mess is actually created by us. Essentially, we try to impose some selection pressure. And because of this selection pressure, now they are forced to evolve and forced to incorporate mutation so that they can escape the selection, and then they can try to be, escape the resistance from the host. So that's how it ends up making a drug resistance viruses, or sometimes the mutation is so much, it can even change its variation in the antigenic epitope. So that means it won't be recognized with the antibody. You know, the antigen is the one actually that, and the antibody is the one which is actually made against the antigen, and with the part of the antigen that is used is called the epitope. So the part of the protein which is actually used to make an antibody is we call the epitope. So if there is a mutations in the antigenic epitope, then that antigenic epitope will make a different sets of antibody, and that may or may not neutralize the original viruses. Now, all these things are actually happening using different strategies. I'm trying to give this a prelude to my actual talk on the coronaviruses. So this RNA viruses, there are, you heard about this genetic shift and genetic drift. Genetic drift is something like you have mutations in small numbers, small number of mutations, and that always happens in an influenza virus. Actually, many of you know that influenza virus vaccine is made every year, because every year in the beginning of the flu season, people try to sequence that, and they changed the vaccine which will be more appropriate for that particular year before they started vaccinating to the risky population. So this is that we call an antigenic drift. Now, when you have mutations which are accumulating and evolving, but in a slow manner. But when you have a major change so that the antigenicity is different, and you sometimes ended up with a different genome, then we call it antigenic shift. So shift is much more mutations, drift is lesser accumulations of mutations. Now, other than that, one can also have a reassortment of the virus genomes. So think about in a pig, there are at one time, there are two different virus infects the pig. Then pig becomes a kitchen to somehow mix and match with the genome, and there will be a reassortment of the viruses. Actually, something of that sort happened when the swine flu is actually a creation within the pig. It happened within that. There is an exchange of the genome and ended up with a reassortment of the viruses. And that becomes completely different, and it cannot be recognized by our host immune system. There is also a possibility of, in the virals, the genome could be RNA or DNA. It could be single-stranded RNA, double-stranded RNA, or the single-stranded RNA, DNA, or double-stranded DNA. But as you know, sometimes when there are RNA viruses, there are two viruses again in the same system. They can exchange a part of their segmented genome. As I told you, there could be a reassortment. As you see here, blue and red, they are getting interchanged and they make a completely different virus, like Bunya virus, orthomyxoviruses, which includes flu, then arenaviruses, reoviruses. Then same thing, recombination happens when you have two genomes, they recombine and make it into a different genome, which is called kind of a chimeric genome they ended up. Sometimes they also exchange the genome, and which we call actually template switching. Means like an RNA-dependent RNA polymerase was actually supposed to copy one genome, and suddenly they started grabbing another genome and doing that, and ended up, because of this switch, you ended up copying a completely different. So essentially a bad student copying from two different students sitting in left and the right. And if you now combine that, you can imagine what will be the terrible task for the examiner to understand the answers. So that's precisely happens because of this exchange of the unsegmented RNA virus sequences and ended up with a completely different character, and that our human system can't recognize, and we actually start struggling for that. Another thing that we have learned from this virus is actually virus does not, it comes like a small briefcase. It doesn't even come with a suitcase. Now, when they do, so they essentially try to completely depend on the host. So the virus enters, uncodes, then the genome comes out. The genome then translates, means like this RNA, if it is a positive strand RNA, it can directly get into a protein. Or if it is a negative strand RNA, then it will make first positive strand and then make the protein and make the protein. Now those viral proteins are then being used to make a complex, which we call a replication complex or virus replication complex. Now this virus replication complex will have the original template of the viral RNA and the proteins that are required. It's something like you can imagine that you are making a food. And you have different spices are the viral proteins, and you have, this is the vessel, the RNA. So you put all these spices and vegetables and make beautiful food at the end of this, and then you essentially make more and more of that, which we call actually replication of the genome. And these genome now get encapsulated into a new packet and then delivered through Swiggy at your doorsteps. Now what happens is essentially, now the whole thing is packaged, egressed out of the cells, and then started invading the neighboring cells. And that's how this happens. Now, as I told you, it's a simple phenomenon, but it actually, it's a very, very complex situation. What happens that virus RNA, as I told you, that virus comes something like a stranger with a small suitcase, a small briefcase. Now it doesn't have anything, so it has to depend everything. So there will be this viral RNA that is coming out, will have RNA and protein interaction. Sometimes there is in the infected cells protein and protein crosstalk. Then sometimes there are protein and lipid within the host system, they have interaction. Now within the viral and the host protein, so viral is guest, host is host. So viral and the host protein start stalking each other, and then they participate, they goes to kitchen and makes the protein. An important and specific role of the host factors in this replication and translation is very, very unique. And these factors are different for different viruses. It's not like A, B, C, D. If you identify A, B, C, D, then you know the biology of the virus, because every virus is going to use A, B, C, D. No. So it could be still a different alphabets for them. It could be completely different requirement for them. And sometimes A, B, C's are also modified to A dash, B dash, C dash. So to understand all these host proteins that the virus is manipulating, if we know, then only we can handle the virus and actually challenge the virus to kill it. So the host factors are the key determinants of the viral pathology and evolution. So if we really need to know the evolution of the virus, we need to know how they survive in the host, right? So this is something like a big symphony or an orchestra, where every protein or every RNA will have different role. For hepatitis C, in my lab at IISc for last 22 years, we have been studying that the virus goes inside, as I told you, it's a lonely creature, it goes inside the cells and make use of all these proteins. So this is essentially the team leader who somehow hijacks the whole system to work for this team leader. And these are the proteins which are, majority of them are nuclear protein. Now these proteins are made to come out to the cytoplasm. From nucleus, they come out to the cytoplasm. Then they are forced to bind to the viral RNA. Either they bind at the 5' UTR, untranslated region. This is the open reading frame which codes for the protein. And the down is the 3' UTR, which is again untranslated. It helps. Now all these proteins, they have their different roles in the cells. But in the infected cells, they are made to come out and then work for the virus. So they bind to the 5' UTR to help them making protein. They bind to the 3' UTR to help them to replicate. So more and more RNA. So you can imagine the situation is essentially somebody burst into the kitchen, make use of your spices and the vessels and make beautiful food, and the host is starving outside. Host is not allowed to have the food or even enter to the kitchen. So that's the whole thing. And these could be the proteins. It could be small RNA, like which we call microRNAs, which could be long non-coding RNA, which we think that they are useless because they don't make protein. But now, last few years, people have understood, no, this long non-coding RNA, which does not code for protein, can also change the game. So they are the game changers. And we have been trying to understand that how actually these proteins are orchestrated by hepatitis C in their favor to establish a chronic infection in a liver cells. And not only knowing that, I will just switch gear a little bit. What we told in what we have learned from the lab, we also try to give them back. So we try to see, well, we know there's a small RNA within the virus which actually attracts the ribosome to bind on. Now we try to use that RNA as a competitor and show, well, now if you use this small RNA, the ribosome will be attracted, ribosomal protein will be attracted to this RNA. It cannot bind to the viral RNA and it can achieve translation. I told you there are proteins which need to bind to the viral RNA. So we identify which part of the protein is actually recognizing to the viral RNA. Made a polypeptide, and that peptide is just something like 7 amino acids. We showed if you take that 7 amino acid, then instead of the host protein, only the peptide goes and binds to the viral RNA. So peptide binding does not help the virus to replicate. So virus is essentially stops their replication. So these are different methods we have given back and then showed that these are the approaches people can use it, either small RNA or a peptide, or even the monoclonal antibody that are actually raised from the people who have cured of the virus can be given back to the patient to make sure that hepatitis C people, infected people, can be cured of. And this we also made a VLP based vaccine, which is actually virus-like particle, which has every surface protein, but does not have the nucleic acids inside it. Now we are trying to make similar VLP for the COVID virus as well. The good thing is essentially it has all the antigenicity, but it does not have the infectivity. So you don't have to worry about using biosafety level 3 or using containment zone. You can use it in your laboratory to find out whether this VLP vaccine will be effective into an animal system. And then later on you go to a preclinical trial. And we are actually using it for a mice which harbors human hepatocytes. Why mice, humanized mice? Because hepatitis C does not infect mice. So this is a big challenge. So we actually overcome this challenge by collaborating with a lab in Japan who actually made mice to harbor human hepatocytes. In those mice, if you now infect with hepatitis C virus, they pick up the virus infection. And then we use that, if we use our antivirus, it can be actually tested in an in vivo system, whether they will be able to successfully challenge and stop the viral replication. We have also shown from our lab that there are compounds in pomegranate. Everybody takes pomegranate, but we don't know that it's such a wonderful fruit to have a hepatoprotective activity. And we have isolated this compound and showed successfully that it can actually inhibit the viral proliferation in the liver cells. Same thing, a lot of people uses bhui amla. Now this bhui amla, we showed that there are two compounds, phyllanthrin and codilagene, which can be actually isolated and then try to use it for as an antiviral activity. This was being used for a long time in the ancient India as a treatment for jaundice. People didn't know why they were using it, but now we had the reason and we could identify the compounds which are doing it. All of them are actually published and we are trying to file patent also, and some of them are approved. Try to see how we can move on to the next step. So essentially, I'm just trying to give you an example how knowing the biology of the virus helps us to evolve a strategy to effectively counter the virus proliferation. But the challenges are new, and COVID is the latest challenge that we are facing. Now, if you look at this COVID virus, the main thing with the COVID virus is which we call SARS-CoV-2, coronavirus 2. It's a 30 kilobase positive sense genome. I told you in the beginning only that usually longer the genome, the lesser is the mutation. So the trade-off between the genome length and the mutation rate is actually saved us. So it cannot really keep on mutating to an extent like a smaller genome would do it. Longer genome cannot have a higher mutation rate. But the problem that we are facing with SARS-CoV-2 is not that. It is a novel coronavirus and it does not have an active adaptive immune response. Our human immune system is not exposed to this virus early, so we really don't know how to handle this. And second thing is the coronavirus are known to shut down the interferon secretory pathway, thereby overcoming the innate immune response. We are actually geared up to fight back any kind of a pathogen. So any pathogen invade us, our innate immunity, actually interferon is the dada of that, who actually goes and head on and try to flush them off. But a lot of viruses has evolved, and coronavirus is not an exception, that they somehow escape this challenge from the host innate immunity. And that makes the life miserable. So just to recap, as I told you, I will have very little thing to tell you a new thing, because all of you have read so many languages and so many newspapers. So now everything is in the media. But anyway, just to recap, the whole thing actually started the episode of this COVID-19 started it actually 31st December of 2019. It was initially reported in the WHO by China. Country office was informed. 7th January, they could isolate the virus. And people were alarming when 15 healthcare practitioners in Wuhan hospital actually were confirmed that they have the infection. And although most of these coronavirus infections are mild, it's not like first time we are having coronavirus. We had coronavirus in the past. We have SARS coronavirus. We have Middle East coronavirus, which we call MARS coronavirus, but have caused more than 1,000 cumulative cases as in the past 2 decades, with mortality 10%, and SARS coronavirus and 37% of the MARS coronavirus. Fortunately, this particular coronavirus, which we call COVID-19, is not at the level of the SARS, which is 10%, or even MARS, which is worse, that is 37% lethality. So, but still, we are having such a pandemic and such a miserable time is because of its high transmissibility. I will come to that, why this is highly transmissible. But just to give you a glimpse of how this virus is invading us. So the virus, this is human coronavirus, is actually goes inside the cells by receptor-mediated endocytosis. The receptor is called the ACE2, which is like an angiotensin receptors. It goes inside the endosomes, fuses with the endosome membrane, and then the viral RNA comes out. And this genomic RNA then from positive strand, it can make the proteins, as I showed you in the other also. So the proteins then make a replication complex with the viral RNA. And from there, they make either the negative stranded subgenomic RNA or they make positive stranded subgenomic RNA. Remember, they don't make a big polyprotein. They make subgenomic RNA and they make smaller proteins. So there is 2 proteins, polyprotein. One is polyprotein 1A, other one is polyprotein 1AB. I'll come to that. Now, so after the genome is replicated, this genome is then assembled, packaged within the virus, and this virus goes into the smooth walled vesicles, and so that they are actually safe within the vesicle, and then goes out nicely out of the infected cells. Now, what all important things are? The spike protein, you have learned from the media that this is the notorious protein. Other than that, you have the envelope protein, membrane protein, and the nucleocapsid protein. These are actually all decorated in the surface, okay? But inside there are some non-structural or functional proteins which really doesn't really come into play for the immunogenicity as such in the beginning. So if you want to just give you a little bit now into the biology of the virus. So this is an RNA virus which has a 5' cap structure, means like it is modified at the 5' end of the RNA, and you also have a 3' poly A tail, and it contains multiple open reading frame. You can see this is one open reading frame 1A. Now 1A and 1B is actually, this is interesting. One open reading frame, the ribosome keep on translating the viral RNA, then they slip back one nucleotide and then make a frame shift, means they started walking in a different path and make another protein. So when there is a ribosome frame shift, you get the 1A, 1B. When you don't have a shift, then you only make 1A, but you don't make the rest of the protein. Now, when you make this 1A, 1B, after that you have the spike protein, then envelope protein, matrix protein, and the nucleocapsid protein. And that's the whole virus, and that is actually coded into 30 kilobase gene. But how does it really matter? Now, the problem, remember I told you that the major problem that we are facing with this particular virus is the high transmissibility. Now, how a virus becomes highly transmissible? Usually, if you just take any virus, the virus, as I told you, they can undergo mutation because they have a faulty ribosome RNA-dependent RNA polymerase, and they can actually ended up with an antigenic drift, or sometimes they can have an antigenic shift. And ultimately, then there is some mutations in such a way, now they have high affinity for the receptor. So if you imagine the protein, let's say the spike protein, is known to interact with the SCE2 receptor. But suddenly there is a mutation and there are more mutations. So it has a much more affinity to make contact with the host cell and enter into the host cells. Now this ligand and the receptor, you can also think about a key and a lock. You have multiple keys. You know, sometimes in a lab you have 12 keys. 12 people can enter, because we always go to Yashwanthpur in IISc and then we try to make copies of the keys. But you will see all the keys are actually not working to the same extent. Most of the time, the original keys are much efficient to open the lock. Now, there are receptors and ligands. So if the lock and key is working fine, then the entry is much more effective. When we talk about the affinities, essentially, you have the right kind of a structure of the ligand and the receptor, and then and only then the door opens and it can enter into the cells. And so what actually happens usually, even in case of coronavirus, maybe originally the virus was not so notorious, but in between they have gone into an intermediate host. And in the intermediate host, they have undergone some kind of a brainwash. And because of that Mogoj Dholai, now you have more mutations and they started behaving strangely and differently and started attacking the human host. And that's how it becomes so notorious. Now, I'll give you a little bit in depth that the receptor that we call angiotensin receptor is the SCE2 receptor. And people have shown not only the SCE2 receptor, there is one co-receptor, means like a chota bhai. Now, this TMPRSS2 helps in the entry. So you need both SCE2 and the TMPRSS2. We don't rule out that there are several other co-receptors which are being now studied and see whether they also contribute to it. But well, this could be just happened to original human coronavirus, may not be the same thing which is actually we are experiencing now. So people have done some experiment. What they did, they took regular human cell line, epithelial cell line, human epithelial cell line, HeLa cells, and then they try to see if you express this receptor SCE2, will it now infect it by the virus? And we found that if you use SCE2 receptor of human, it can be infected. If you express the bat, it can be infected. If you express the SCE2 receptor of swine, it can be infected, but it cannot be infected by a mice SCE2 receptor. That tells you that it has undergone mutations, but it still has some selective species barrier. So it can't really come from everywhere. But it's a major question that we were asking, particularly in the beginning of this pandemic in March and April, that where did we get this kind of a notorious virus? So people looked at the genome and then they actually tried to find out, look at their horoscope. Horoscope is essentially the phylogenetic analysis, where from they originated and where they are going. So with this phylogenetic analysis, they found that actually this nCoV or this COVID-19 is very similar to bat SLCoV, or it is also similar to another virus which is originated from pangolin. Now, in between, people started thinking, well, it is actually originated from one country. Is that possible that it is a man-made, it is intentional? All this kind of confusion actually came out, and then people tried to rule out the possibilities. Then they found, actually, if you really compare the virus isolated between bat or the SARS coronavirus that we isolated from human or from pangolin, it looks like they are somehow related, the pangolin, bat, and SARS. And they also identified that there is a 5 key amino acid mutations which is only found in the in bat, but not in the human and the pangolin, suggesting that these 5 key amino acids are consistent between the pangolin and human coronaviruses, but not in bat. So it's probably not from bat, but it is highly possible that it has come from pangolin. How did it happen? So it's possible that bat infected pangolin and pangolin meet which was actually sold into the live market might have been consumed, and then it actually started coming into human. So there is a possibility that the bat have a direct contact with the intermediate host. As I told you, intermediate host can actually mutate it, and after mutation it started infecting the human, and from one human, because of the droplet spread, it goes to another human. Now I will just want to show you one more thing. Is there is another thing people have found, that in this spike protein, which is actually the one that makes a contact with the human receptor ACE2, the spike protein have a potential furin recognition motif, which is called a furin cleavage sites. That cleavage sites is actually have the human coronavirus, and because of that, it has much more affinity for the human receptor compared to the other species. But now, one more thing I would like to mention, people are always worried what should be the distance between two persons, two infected persons. Now, the infected persons can infect other person by the droplet. The virus actually is somehow cordoned within the bubble of the droplet. Now, if the droplet is big, which is close by, then it has chance of having more number of viruses. But as you have a distance, even if the droplet reaches there, but the size of the droplet is smaller and smaller, and there are chances of having viruses there is also lesser and lesser. So the droplets which is far off reaches there, but have very little virus to contaminate the next neighboring person. So people have calculated that this much of distance is good enough to have a man-to-man cross-contamination. But the problem is, looks like now it is actually crossing the species barrier also, and there are reports that there are some tigers, and also in cat there is actually infection. Now, how did they get it, and whether this is anything to do with the cross species jumping, are there mutations or not, is something which people want to understand. So as I was talking about, the people have different kind of a study. This is a study that came out in the New England Journal of Medicine, which showed the type of exposure from the contact tracing data. This you have heard, that somebody is infected in the family, immediately people try to find out the primary contact, they try to find out the secondary contact. So the primary contact and the secondary contact is something which is like primary contact is most likely within the family or within the office with your colleague or something. But if you can now eliminate that problem, then it's the social, tourism, work and travel that can also expose you to the virus. So this is something which we have learned in a hard way, and we try to understand now that why this virus and how this virus has been evolving. Now, this is one study. It was actually coordinated from our institute, National Institute of Biomedical Genomics. This noted very famous statistician, and actually he turned out to be a better biologist, and he actually founded this institute called National Institute of Biomedical Genomics, which I am heading now. Professor Parthapratim Majumdar and Nidhan Biswas, they showed that SARS-CoV-2 belonging to the A2A type possesses a non-synonymous variant like D614G. So there is a mutation in this particular virus which makes them more prone or more susceptible to the or more affinity, actually not susceptible, more affinity towards a human receptor ACE2, and that's how this A2A type enjoys a major advantage to infect and survive. This is one of this initial report, and then after that there are several reports which showed how actually this D614G, so it's actually from aspartic acid to glycine, how this change is actually overcome all the other variants and spread it all over the world. Another study from the same institute, which we actually coordinated, and I have Srinivasan and Harsha is actually from Indian Institute of Science, and this is in collaborations with some hospitals in Kolkata. We just took 9 sequences. This is early in May. We actually tried to do a quick survey and find out how much variations you do see in that. There also we found that A2A actually is the most. What is A2A? Is essentially this is the original virus was called, the virus that came out from Wuhan was called the O type. Now from O, there were actually B1 type, and then from B1, they started making different kind of mutations. And when the mutations and their character is too much different, then we try to subclass them. So we made another class, which we call A2A. Now there are A3. Now all these things actually try to show that these are having differential affinity towards the receptor. They are either less or more susceptible to the human infection. So as I told you that in collaborations with Dr. Srinivasan's lab in IISc, we were actually interested to see, can we really understand what is this D614G mutations? You know, you probably have read in the newspaper enough time that this particular mutation made it more affinity towards the receptor. And he said that if you look at the cryo-electron microscopy of the whole structure of the protein, there are 3 cryo-electron microscopy structures solved so far. But then when we compare, because there are different parts, when we compared it and come up with a model, he showed actually this mutation, how it changes the conformation of the receptor binding domain. Receptor binding domain is the domain which actually is involved in binding to the ACE2 receptor. Another protein that we have actually modeled is the nucleocapsid protein, which actually helps in the packaging of the virus. We showed there is a mutation in the one that we observed in Kolkata, and later on we found actually now we have sequenced 1,000 genome. I am going to show you there also this mutation prevails, and this mutation changes. Again, this is the neighboring of the RNA binding domain, receptor binding domain, and the oligomerization domain, dimerization domain. And you showed that actually because of the mutation, now the 2 modified bases, amino acids can come closer and changes a disordered structure to a ordered structure. And because of this change in the nucleocapsid, its functional activity is changed, and its susceptibility or packaging efficiency is also changed. But that was only with the 9 sequences. But we wanted to do it in a larger scale. How do you do that? So Government of India asked us to coordinate a program where we'll have 1,000 sequence in 2.5 months. So we did that. So what we did is essentially we collected samples from all over India, from different states. I'll show you the states are actually, what we did, we divided into east, west, north, south, and we used different DBT institutes. And of course, we included INSTEM as a DBT institute, but NCBS and IISc along with it, to see whether we can have the samples from different regions, and collaborated with different hospitals. You see, from Kolkata, there are 2 hospitals, Bangalore IISc has given, Uttarakhand, Delhi, Faridabad, Wardha, Aurangabad, Bhubaneswar, and Pune, Maharashtra, and collected all the sequences and tried to find out that can you see the variations, means like the mutations, and when they have started showing up the mutations. And the second phase, the first phase is complete. We just actually had the Minister Harshvardhan ji has actually announced this in the public domain. But now we have a bioRx in bioarchives. We have submitted one manuscript. We are trying to publish this, but we are actually more now interested to understand the genomic determinant. We try to identify we are trying to identify the genetic polymorphism that either confers susceptibility or protection from a viral infection. So it looks like, I will show you data all over India, not much difference in terms of mutations. It is not true that the virus is quite different from east to west or north to south. But then why there is so much of difference in terms of their infectivity or susceptibility or even the lethality? You know, if you really see the number of cases who are not successfully recovered are varying in different states. Why? Is there a genetic determinant, means like a host determinant? So the virus, even if it is the same mutation, cannot be so much effective or successful in making pathogenesis in a particular host. So that essentially we are trying to understand. that how the genetic determinant can be correlated with the disease severity. So I'll just brief you how we did this whole thing. Is essentially we showed that if you collect samples, all these yellow spots are the stations where we have collected samples, either the nasal or oropharyngeal swabs, and then isolated RNA from there. We're trying to do a total RNA-seq as well, so that we can, whatever cellular RNA we get, we will try to see those. And then we are trying to sequence the viral RNA and understand the genetic diversity. As you see here, this is the phylogenetic time, but with time tree. So what happens in January, you can see most of them were actually O, A2 and A3. Now there is a new nomenclature that's called 19A, 19B, 20A, 20B, 20C. So the nomenclature is keep on changing. So this is the latest one. So it shows that as you go on from January, then January 29, then February, then March, then April, then May, then June, you can see the divergence actually stopped almost after February. And by March, you can see all this branching also becoming clustering together. And you can see by April, May, they have already reached like where they are supposed to. So essentially, multiple lineages are introduced, which are evolving over time. And we try to understand the haplotype diversities within them. Haplotype diversity is essentially, you have a set of mutations which occur together. Means like you have A dash, B dash, C dash, but whenever you see a mutation, you will always see A dash, B dash, C dash will show up. So that kind of analysis when we did, that we found that all these haplotypes by June, we have actually reached the peak. So the temporal haplotype diversity's landscape appears to be similar in India. So it is not true that East, West, North, South, they are behaving strangely or differently all the time. That's essentially Government of India wanted to know from us, from this consortium, which I headed, try to see that how this virus has evolved in different zones in East, West, North, South. And we have found, actually, if you really go by the state, the haplotype distribution, there is some differences between the North and the Western, but North and East, there are similar way. You can see 20A, 20A. But if you see Southern and the Western, means like Bangalore and Mumbai, you can see there is a similar trait. So within the haplotype, different states appear to have different proportions of that. East and North are similar, West and South are similar. Another thing that we have tried to show that these lineages are how they are connected, that where from we got all these strains like 20A, 20B, 20C. And as you see that we have got it from different countries, Brazil, New Zealand, China, Oman, United Kingdom, Saudi Arabia, Italy, Greece, Switzerland. And looks like 20A actually came from Italy and Saudi Arabia in all Indian regions. But in case of Eastern India, 20A came additionally from the UK and Switzerland. Same way, 20B was introduced mostly from the UK, and additionally it has come from Western India and the Brazil. And if you look at the haplotype networks, it looks like there are some similarity the way the mutation has occurred. If you really see between Orissa and West Bengal, because the borders are actually shared, you can see much of this because of the interstate traveling. There are a lot of similarity in the variations of the mutations that we have pointed out. Maharashtra, Delhi, Haryana, and Uttarakhand grouped together with 2 to 4 single nucleotide variants. So, and not only that, one more thing we found, there is a portion of the sample from Haryana and Karnataka sharing the same parent haplotype. Now, how Haryana and Karnataka got mixed up? It could be because of the Parijayi Shramik, which we call is essentially the possible transmission by the migratory laborers. And that's how we probably ended up with the mixing up with the haplotypes in certain cases. And these are actually trustworthy because they what we call the negative estimate of Tajima factors or even the AMOVA factors, which are reasonable, which suggests that this analysis is something which is in the desired way. The variations I told you, D614G, which is already, we found it earlier, and now we again verified that how much, Delhi, Gujarat, Karnataka, Maharashtra, and how this 614G is taking over. And another one that we showed is actually in the nucleocapsid, there are 2 mutations I told you. Incidentally, the same mutations we actually showed in our pilot study when we did it with the 9 sequence from Kolkata. We did report it in May in Journal of Bioscience, which is published from Indian Academy of Science, Bangalore, which we actually now verified in 1,000 genome, and it shows that this mutation in the north there are 37%, east there are 9%, west there are 85%, and south there are 70%. So this mutation might have some relevance in terms of this. We also spotted some interesting thing in terms of the 5' untranslated region. We identified a stem loop which is appearing in the mutant strain that is actually making a pandemic. See, I told you 2003 we had this human SARS coronavirus that killed 10% people, but it was not so highly transmissible. But now 2019, although we are having a less mortality, but this is high transmissibility, and we can see there is, because of one mutation, there's a complete introduction of a new structure. And what we are now hypothesizing that this structure interacts with the protein, and that we are actually trying to validate in my lab at IISc to see, and this is actually done one of my postdoc at NIBMG who showed that this is the appearance of a new structure, and we're trying to validate that. Not only that, we showed that there are mutations in the nucleocapsid gene which attracts differential microRNA binding. In the host, I told you that there are a lot of armory. We have it, innate immunity. MicroRNA also sometimes helps us to protect from virus infection. It actually directs to the viral RNA, a viral gene, and inhibits that. But we can see because of the mutation, some of the host microRNA binding sites are altered. And that might be one of the reasons that we are not able to challenge this virus in the innate immunity as much. So as I told you, this highlights of the findings that we have done, that COVID-19 has actually, we have sequenced 1,000 genome, and the result shows that all over India, there is now a major subtypes called A2A, which is also renamed as 20ABC, with a mutation in D614G. And that is all over, no matter whatever east, west, north, south, all over actually is in the same kind of a genotype, which is overpowering the human race. And additional mutations in important regions are being analyzed in and it's a big study involving 5 different DBT institutes and several MHRD institutes and hospitals. And like IISc Bangalore is one of them. We have institute from Kolkata, as I told you, Aurangabad, Rishikesh, Wardha, Hyderabad, Pune, Delhi. Everywhere we try to collect, and we are still continuing. This is just beginning. We are trying to understand these things. Finally, I would like to just give you in a positive note, these mutations and all these things are actually somehow increasing our stress factor. So good thing is, actually there are now vaccine in the horizon, and you all have actually read it in the newspaper that there is some claim from Russia that came out today only, that the Russian, yesterday actually, the Russian vaccine, which is called Gamaleya, and this is dubbed as Sputnik 5. It's a joint effort from the Moscow Gamaleya Institute and the Russian Defense Ministry, but we need to wait and watch and see how it is effective. We heard about this AstraZeneca and the University of Oxford joint venture, where our Serum Institute is also a part of it. Moderna virus is also in the phase 3. Moderna vaccine is actually made from an RNA. This is something like a unique concept of using mRNA as a vaccine. You have heard about it, and this vaccine was protective against monkey from the coronavirus, but now in human we are trying to wait and see how this phase 3 is launched in July 27, and hopefully we'll get the results soon. There is also the Pfizer vaccine is also coming in a good way, and this is also in the second and third phase trial is going on. Zydus cadillas are also actually in the race. And more importantly, there is one initiative you have all heard. Bharat Biotech is developed in collaborations with the ICMR and NIV Pune, National Institute of Virology, and they are hoping that they have started the human trial and hoping to get the phase 1 and phase 2 human trials are actually going in parallel, and hopefully we'll get something India-made vaccine very soon. So don't worry, be happy, but be safe and stay well. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you very much, sir. It was very informative and very nice presentation. Sir, there are a few questions from the participants. So I'll be reading one after the other. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So the first question is, if someone is infected by novel coronavirus, is he or she will now be able to gain an immunity against it in future time, just as in the case of varicella zoster virus of chickenpox?
So chicken, see, it's a good question. See, what happens, we definitely get some kind of an immunity whenever we are infected with the virus. But what you said, that the pox virus immunity may not be same as an immunity that we get it from RNA virus. As I told you, that RNA virus keeps on changing. So tomorrow we might have something quite different. Whatever I talk today is essentially how fast they can evolve into completely different. But that doesn't happen for the pox viruses that much. And that's why we are having such an effective vaccinations there. But what people are talking about, this vaccine or the antibody or the immune response depends on the memory cells. So people have different kind of a hypothesis. Some people say 6 months, some people says 1 year, some people says 2 years. But what we believe, it will probably vary from person to person because of the host determinant. Much of it actually depends on the host immunity. A particular person might have much more strong immunity and develop strong immunity against this virus compared to other person. So you cannot make a generalized statement that once you are infected, there is already some relapse cases. Today I got a request from some hospital that they already have 10 relapse cases. Can we really sequence and find out whether the virus is again mutated and that's how they are relapsed or not? So that answers your question, that these antibody responses or immunity could be short-lived. I said it could be because much of it depends on how good is your immune system to make the memory cells for this. How good you remember your enemy, so you don't allow that enemy to attack you again. But if you are forgetful and forgive that enemy can again overpower you in future. So that's essentially the essence, right? You need to see how well you have learned the lesson and how well you can counter the enemy next time. So it will definitely partly due to the host determinant.
Yeah.
Individuals. Yes.
Yeah. There is the next question is from Professor Sovan Lal Das. After it enters, before replicating, virus needs to come out of the vesicles. How does it disrupt the membrane?
See, that's another thing. So we still don't know. See, the problem was that now only we have a cell culture model for the virus. So we don't know the mechanism of the cell rupture or lysis. See, there are different kind of viruses. In some cases, they rupture the virus, the membrane, and then break open the cells and go out. Sometimes they leak out or egresses out as a vesicle. Sometimes they remain there as a chronic. Now, what is the property of this different genetic variant that we talked about? Needs to be tested in a cell culture model, which is now in the agenda of us. But we just need to have some time to get into the virus. It's just only 6 months old virus, so we don't know much about the biology of this. Yes. Did I lose the connection?
No, sir. I'll take up the next question.
Yeah, sorry.
Sir, you can go. Continue.
Yeah. This is the next question is Ramchandra Krishnaswamy sir. How does ordinary soap kill the virus? That is the first one.
Ordinary?
Then, soap kill the virus.
Detergent.
Yeah, detergent. Yeah.
Yeah.
Then, yes, sir. Please go ahead. Yeah.
No, I mean that's true for everything. I mean, detergent can actually rupture all the membranes, right? So that's how it's a general chemistry that holds true for most of the pathogens, not only the virus, even the bacteria. So the detergent will always kill it. And then in sometimes the detergent also have some alkaline compositions. Now, if you have alkaline compositions because of the pH increase, it lyses the membrane proteins. So then the membrane, whatever the covering, will won't last in presence of high pH.
Environmental factors such as temperature, do they influence multiplication or mutation rate? There is no uncertainty and no clarity regarding this.
Actually, it is true. It is true. People originally thought when we started having this in January, February, or even in March, people thought that the moment summer will come, the virus will disappear. People were talking about it, but it didn't happen. But what people have done it in the laboratory and showed that actually there is very little correlations between an increase in temperature in the atmosphere. I mean, it's like an environmental temperature. I'm not talking about heating the virus. Heating the virus will definitely kill it. But I'm just saying that atmospheric thing, we don't have a positive association study so far to a convincing level. But again, as I told you, this virus is as new as 6 months old baby. So we need to learn more about their character and then comment on this.
Yeah. If coronavirus is supported and transmitted more readily by bats, why not birds? What are the biological factors that makes this difference, if at all?
That's a good question. I mean, I was also wondering, but you know, what we have just discussed, that this virus enters, I told you the lock and key. So you have the key, but that doesn't mean that it's a master key and you can open all the locks. So if you imagine that every birds may not have the same receptors that are necessary for the virus to enter, or even if they enter, then they have to survive there. Remember, in the host, they have to go, first is the entry, but second is they have to replicate inside. For replicating, they have to make their protein first. Now, either, I can imagine, I don't know, I don't have a real answer, but I can imagine in the kitchen you enter it. But the type of, let's say you ended up, being a South Indian, you ended up with a Bengali kitchen. Very, very little scope for you to make a rasam. Or in the other way around, if a Bengali landed up with a South Indian kitchen, they will also have a struggle. I mean, I am from Kolkata and stayed in most of my life in Bangalore, so I can give you an analogy of this. So if the virus enters into a kitchen where they don't have the proteins they need to replicate or feed themselves, then they can't survive. So when you say why bat and not in another avian flu kind of thing, it could be because of the receptor, could be because of the host factor, which is not permissive for the virus to replicate in that. And unless they replicate, they can't really propagate in that particular system.
Yeah. The next question is there any difference spike protein of SARS-CoV-2 with the other spike protein of viruses which are potentially attacking human cells? I mean, it's difference in terms of SARS-CoV-1 or MERS as far as spike protein is concerned.
Yeah, I mean, the spike proteins, actually there are, if you do a homology search between the sequences of amino acids, they are quite different. There are, I think I have one of those slides I showed you, the variations is quite a much. And not only that, I think I also told you that there is some unique 5 amino acid signature, which is missing in the other viruses. So there are 79 to 85% differences, and that differences might probably changes their affinity towards the human receptor, which is being used for attacking the human. So
Next
the
is
affinity has changed because of the mutation. Yes.
next is if COVID-19 is mutating fast, how it is possible to develop vaccine?
Right. See, these questions keeps coming. Even minister also was worried because that if you show so much of variations in mutations, then how people will take it up. But see what happens. Much of these mutations may not change the conformation of the epitope. So when we discuss or decide about vaccine strategy, we always keep it in mind that we only take the conserved domain, which is not going to change. See, virus cannot afford to have mutations or changes or variations in a conserved region, which is highly required for the virus. Virus can only afford to have a cosmetic changes in other parts, which is dispensable. And that's how they just somehow win the game. But if you know that which all epitopes are conserved, because now we have so much of sequence all over the world, right? So you can always identify the portions of the epitope which is not going to change no matter how much mutation it happens. Then it is actually possible to have an effective vaccines for all the strains. But I can't talk about tomorrow if there are so mutations accumulated that even the spike protein looks very different, then the host might miss it to recognize it. But otherwise, to all certainty, when we make the vaccine designed, we keep it into considerations that we take up this conserved domain, which are not likely to change easily for this variations in the mutations.
Yeah. The next question is, does the spike proteins of SARS-CoV-2 change their antigenic properties upon mutation? If so, then how sensitive and specific will be the antibodies against the spike proteins for diagnostic purposes?
Right. So it's the same answer again. Again, when we try to have a diagnostic antibody kit or something like that, we keep it in mind that there will be variations in this. Or even for, that is true for the RT-PCR. Because if you have so much of variations, if you have a primers and that the primer binding region is mutated, then what will happen to the detection? So those questions always we face. But usually whenever or whoever designs this diagnostic kit, keep it in mind, they only look for the conserved region which virus cannot afford to change or accumulate mutation in those regions. So it should not alter, it should not. But again, I'm just saying in science, nothing we can say it in certainty. There is always a 1% possibility that there is so much change, it might escape it.
Yeah. What is the mechanism of the adhesion of virus on detectant surfaces? Can a surface with similar charge as that of the spike protein prevents its adhesion?
So this is a difficult question for me. So you are saying it's an electrostatic interaction?
I think Chirashree Roy Chaudhary should unmute herself and speak about it. Yeah.
So if you can speak about, if you can explain what is it. If you talk about the electrostatic interaction, then it's different. Yes.
Good evening, sir.
Yeah.
Yes, I'm from electrical background. I really do not know about the mechanism of the interaction. But I was just thinking that if it could be of electrostatic nature, then whether it is possible to prevent due to repulsion. Like, I do not know the mechanism by which it adheres onto the surface, whether it's van der Waals or electrostatic or what is the dominant mechanism. So I was just curious to know. If it is so, then
so you are talking about
if it is possible.
No, that's fine. So your question is
basically I was trying to know that whether electrostatic mechanisms are involved. In that case, whether just repulsion can be used to prevent
metal surface. Between a metal surface or which surface you are talking about?
Like the common surfaces we encounter every day, like our clothes. Then it can be any metal surface.
Whether the virus will stick there or not.
Yes, because the way it is getting transmitted in the community. So from that viewpoint, I was just asking, curious to know.
Right, it's a good question, but I don't think that much of studies is done with this particular
Okay.
virus. But people, there is some study, if I'm not wrong, there are some studies where they compared with a newspaper, with a table, steel surface, and they tried to
Okay.
show that how long this virus is there. So
Okay.
what we have learned from there, I can share with you, is essentially no matter even if the virus is there, virus loses its infectivity. So virus might be physically present. So let's say if you take a swab after 24 hours from a wooden surface, from a steel surface, and from a clothes,
Yes.
you might be able to detect the viral RNA there, no problem. But if you use that virus to infect another cell, it may not infect. So virus loses its infectivity. So that answers your question. So perhaps
Okay.
while sticking to this surface, they are probably electrostatic, because of the electrostatic interaction or other interaction, they're losing their conformation. So now the
Okay.
virus is there, but it becomes a dead virus. So
Okay.
that's people says that when you take it, things like particularly people are worried about plastics. Like you get a Swiggy food covered with the plastics, right? So what people say is that either you keep it for a while and then
Yes.
take it, so keep it for 4 hours and then you take it out. Then most likely, even if the virus goes along with you, it won't have the power to infect another person.
Another person.
So
Okay.
it
Yeah.
loses infectivity. That's one thing.
Okay.
And second thing is what I'm also trying to do a practice is essentially if you really have to get outside food, warm it and then have it. I think that's the best. Just warm for even 10, 15 seconds in microwave will kill the
Yeah.
virus.
Yes. That's true.
Yeah.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah.
Sure.
The virus mutates differently in different bodies. If yes, then does that mean the virus is different in different regions?
Virus is not different in different regions. I showed you the data now because this was the question we asked for 1,000 genome sequencing. And we found actually similar kind of virus is actually prevailing. But one thing is definitely there, which we called in the beginning, I showed you that there's a selection pressure, right? So virus always try to mutate to somehow survive. It's not because of the challenge that the virus is facing, they're forced to mutate. Now, if let's imagine a virus ended up with a place where the people are so immune, they can't really handle them, right? So virus wants to win over those hosts. So there, I think there is a possibility over the time, they might now evolve in a way that now they are able to successfully infect. Even in this pandemic, you'll see in the literature, there are some countries and some pockets of countries are actually immune to this viral infection. How? So one possibility is now the selection pressure was very high and their immunity is very high, virus could not. Now we don't know, because of that selection pressure, we are forcing the virus to evolve in a different way, right? We told you that Darwin said that it's actually man's creation. We throw them the challenge. To overcome the challenge, they evolve mutation. So if the challenge is more, there is a chance that they will evolve more. That basically is happening.
So can the virus be transmitted from a non-symptomatic positive patients? What is your take on it?
So, definitely it is possible, but, again, the literature suggests that the non-symptomatic patients, the viruses are actually weak. Viruses are weak, and that's why the symptoms is also less, right? So there are two ways to look at it. One, the virus is weak. Other is the immune system of that person is very strong, right? That's how you are not developing symptoms. Now, if you consider the first hypothesis that the virus is weak, then the weak virus cannot really infect as efficiently with a virus where the virus is strong. So I would say if the virus is strong, I would expect more symptoms because they can cause pathogenesis. And that person will be more infecting others because of the phenomena. But other way around, it's unlikely. I mean, even in IIC, we have found that asymptomatic patients are actually not spreading that much. I mean, in the hostels, we figured actually asymptomatic patients, whoever actually are, they're not really infecting that many for the associated or the close, which you call primary associates, are not infected as much. So don't worry too much about the asymptomatic patients. But, you know, you should be always having social distance and mask.
Sure, sir. Thank you. Yeah. Why does the virus attacks lungs? Is it because of breathing or because of any other reasons?
So again, literature suggests that in the lung cells, these SCE2 receptors are actually predominant. And in certain drugs, and you know, I was discussing with a cardiologist in Ramaiah Hospital yesterday. We are trying to do some studies with the people who are having cardiovascular disease and getting COVID, and what is the complications that we are facing. So what he was saying, actually, this SCE2 receptors are actually goes high because of different drug treatment. And then because of that, they have become more susceptible. So one thing is the receptor is more in the lung cells, and that's how the virus lands up there. That's why lung. And again, in the lung cells, they can replicate well. As I told you, that not only landing up into the right, in the kitchen, you have to end up with the right kitchen so that you can make your own favorite dish. That's important. And virus probably gets that thing in the there, not here.
Yeah. Recently, it is said that coronavirus is airborne and doesn't transmit via surface.
Huh?
So,
Say it again.
recently, it is said that coronavirus is airborne and doesn't transmit via surface. Your take on it, sir?
No, see, there are a lot of discussion about whether it's an airborne or not. So essentially, if you consider that the droplets are actually flying everywhere, I told you the large droplets or small droplets. So if you consider that if there is an infected person in the audience and that person is coughing, so the droplets will all over. Now, the moment the virus is outside the droplet, even if they exist, they loses their infectivity. They're not covered, right? So in that case, even if it is airborne, but it is not infected, those airborne viruses we consider may not be as effective in infection. You got my point?
Yeah.
So if it is a smaller droplet, there are lesser number of virus. They might be existing in the nature for a while, and that's how people showed, oh, I could see that it is actually in the surface or in the air. But if you really now isolate those viruses and then ask them to infect a cell culture model, you'll see that they're not able to infect as efficiently. So they loses their infectivity.
Yeah. What is the most important epitopes of COVID-19 to vaccine development?
So I don't think there is a single epitope. There are multiple epitopes in the spike protein, which is called the, essentially people are using the receptor binding domain, which is highly antigenic. And there are multiple epitopes which are being used. But now people are trying different methods. See, what happens, you try to cover all the possibilities that you discussed, right? There will be mutations, there will be people who may not be antigenic as much. So a lot of times, and then not only that, we also have a concept which I forgot to mention is a lot of times the antibody could be neutralizing antibody and non-neutralizing antibody. So if you elicit an immune response which is useless, then there is no meaning because it won't be able to neutralize the virus in future, right? So you are training a sets of armory which are not able to fight. It's not going to help you. So essentially those things people try to consider when they design a vaccine, that you will try to use epitopes which will be more effective in making neutralizing antibody so that they can actually effectively pound on the virus and challenge them, kill them.
Are there parts of pangolin genome inside the genome of SARS-CoV-2 to support the theory of interspecies jump for host?
Pangolin genome?
Inside the genome of SARS-CoV-2, sir. Yeah.
No, I don't think pangolin genome, people haven't shown pangolin genome. They said that the virus isolated from pangolin are similar to human genome.
Yeah.
But I don't see any literature which suggests that it takes away some pangolin genome along with it. So that's a good proposition. I haven't come across.
Yeah. Once affected by the virus and recovered, is there a chance for affecting again?
That's I think I answered already. There are cases some relapse, but very rarely. But it all depends on the immunity of that particular immune setup of that particular individuals. If that person is immunocompromised, then there are, you don't expect that person to develop efficient antibody response. In that case, the risk is there. But, it's unlikely at this stage. But, we have to watch this virus for a year before we comment on it. There are some relapse cases, yes.
Yeah.
But very few.
Yes, thank you. Can we take 3 more questions, sir? Last 3 more questions.
Sure.
Yeah. Does the swab test differentiate between the MERS and COVID virus? Are all the 6 strains of virus detected by the swab test?
Swab test of MERS-CoV.
Yeah, MERS and COVID virus. Are all the 6 strains of virus detected by the swab test?
I don't know.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't think anybody have tried that way. So you're saying that if somebody have some diagnostic kit for SARS or the MERS, and then whether that will be effective in detecting this.
Yeah.
I mean, if it is an antibody detection kit, it should be, because there is some common epitopes, some of them, not all of them. And there is homology in their spike protein. So I would imagine there will be some. That's why sometimes the antibody kit is actually giving us false results. It is very important that you look for the antigen kit. Antigen kit is antigen detection. So essentially it detects the viral protein, or RT-PCR, where they detect the viral genome. But when you are talking about antibody response, you are right. I mean, there is a similarity. Some people might have been exposed in MERS, will be coming positive in case of this. There could be a possibility. So that's why people are aiming for antigen kit and RT-PCR rather than antibody kit.
Yeah. How does the virus survive on non-living surfaces for up to few hours? Does it have some type nutrition supply stored for itself for few hours?
I don't think they carry tiffin carriers. So I don't know. I think it's just because of the structure of the virus. It maybe somehow, I mean, it all depends on how much adverse situation they face within that window of time. Okay, so I don't think there is any systemic study. At least I haven't read any systemic study to see what all adverse situation they can endure. I mean, whether and then how does it affect? I mean, I would imagine that the viral surface proteins are good enough to protect the nucleic acids for a while, and that's how those few hours they can still be. See, when you say that the virus is live and infective, means like the viral RNA inside it is intact. But at the moment you try to see that the viral RNA is degraded for some reason, that virus becomes infective, non-infective.
With reference to one of the answers you were giving, what actually do you mean by weak and strong virus?
Weak and strong virus means, weak means the virus is entering but not able to replicate and cause pathogenesis. And so essentially, even if you detect the virus, means like an asymptomatic, I'm just saying. And as you said it correctly, that even if that virus comes out of that host, it cannot infect the neighboring person so efficiently. So that's how we call weakened virus.
Yeah. Some Ayurvedic homeopathy medicines are being suggested. How do they help in the fight against the virus? Yeah.
See, Ayurvedic and homeopathic medicines, there are two ways to look at it. One is which we call direct acting antivirals, DAA. Means they directly go and stop the viral protease or viral enzymes or RNA-dependent RNA polymers. So there are a class of Ayurvedic and homeopathic medicines which they say that will directly inhibit one of the viral enzymes and inhibit the viral replication. But there are also possibilities and indirect help when the virus are actually inhibiting, increasing the immunity of the host. Now, since the immunity is increased, host can actually effectively challenge the virus.
Sir, the last question from Dr. Sudhakar. When this COVID likely to end based on the present transmission rate and patterns?
Say it again, please.
When this COVID likely to end based on the present transmission rate and patterns?
See, if I'm very optimistic. Now, if you go by different models, there are some models which are actually close to our heart, which says that by September it will start reducing. And one of the models suggests that if you go with the lockdown way we are doing once in a week or twice in a week, if you continue, that probably, I think one of our IAS scientists has published that it will probably come down to by December to a very, very lower level. And another thing that I was just thinking, hoping, like now you claim, you heard that there is a claim, there is a vaccine already ready. And one or two vaccine comes out, and then they start vaccinating some population, even if it is 10 to 20% populations are being vaccinated, will have an immediate effect on the other population, because you will have less transmission and we can actually break the chain, right? So if I'm highly optimistic, I would say in September middle situation should be much better than what we are having now.
Yeah. Thank you very much, sir. Thank you. It was very nice talk,
Sure.
and you answered so many questions.
I enjoyed the questions. I think this is the first meeting I've given so many talks, but such an interesting questions that I faced. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Sure.
So the
All right.
next webinar series will be on August 26th. That is by Professor Sovanlal Das, Associate Professor. And the title of the talk is How Proteins Interact with Cell Membranes, a Biophysical Study. After that, we are going to have a talk by Professor Mary Frecker, Penn State University on September 9th. Followed by, on September 19th, we are going to have a talk by Professor Ravinder Dahiya, University of Glasgow. That is the Selvarajan Memorial Talk. Then on September 23rd, we are going to have a talk by Professor Mulial, epidemiologist, Christian Medical College, Vellore. Then October 7th, we are going to have Professor Sunil Agarwal from Columbia University, a talk on rehabilitation robotics. So I thank all the participants, and also I thank all the professors and GC members of ISSS for taking time and attending this session. Yeah. I hand it over to Ananta Suresh, sir. Yes, sir.
Okay, I think it has been fantastic, Soumitra. I think it's a great talk. I think your analysis were exquisite. I think most of the people, even the engineers, were able to follow the biology of the coronavirus. Thank you very much. And thank you all for attending.
Thank you.
Good night.
Good night.